Support for the Common Knowledge podcast is brought to you by puremtgo.com. You can support the show personally by going to patreon.com/common knowledge. And you can email the show at commonknowledgemtg@gmail.com.
This is Common Knowledge, a Magic the Gathering podcast about improving at the game with a focus on pauper play. It's not about the cost, it's about the knowledge. Welcome to Common Knowledge. Here are your hosts, Brandon Clark and Lobbert. Enjoy this week's episode of Common Knowledge.
Welcome to the podcast, everybody. This is episode 31 of Common Knowledge. I'm your host, Brandon Clark, and joined with me on the line today is the illustrious Sean the Lobbert.
Adjectives are back, baby.
It depends on my mood.
Yeah. How are you?
If I can think of one, I'll give you an adjective.
How are you?
I'm good.
Okay.
I'm tired, actually. I've been doing this thing lately where I stay up until 3 a.m, just lying in my bed, can't fall asleep.
Huh.
I just cannot sleep, and then my son comes in and wakes me up at 7 a.m. He needs breakfast or something stupid. Yeah.
Well,
so
you should fall asleep.
I'm trying my hardest. I didn't take a nap today because I was like, I'm going to be as tired as I possibly can be when 8 o'clock comes around, so I can just try to fall asleep by 9 or something.
That sounds hard.
Yeah. I'm going to try.
Are you just not working yourself at all? Or you just not getting tired?
I don't know.
Huh.
I feel tired, like that when you feel tired and you're like, I should be asleep. I'm very tired, but your body's just like, no, you're awake. Sit there, stare into the abyss. Think about the horrible life decisions you've made.
Anyway,
how have you been, man?
I've been pretty good. I've been on vacation all this week.
That's
but
cool.
Vacations are more exhausting than recharging more often than not for me.
Right? Like when I take vacation days, it's like I'm taking the day off. Oh, are you doing something awesome? Yeah, I'm sleeping in. I'm staying in my bed all day.
That sounds like a good vacation. Mine's always, I'm running around all over the place in some other part of the country or something like that the whole time. And you don't get to sleep in because you've scheduled stuff since the crack of dawn.
That's the worst. Do you know what is not the worst, though? Magic the Gathering. And
yes.
Pauper. And that's what we're going to talk about today because we're a Pauper podcast. So let's just jump right into the show then, and let's talk about what we've been playing. Sean, you go first.
So I have written down that I have good intentions because I wanted to play Pauper all week, but I was just so busy that I never did. After our discussion last week, I really wanted to jam some stompy games. That used to be, if I was going to play a meta deck, I would play Stompy. And I was like, let's go back to it. I think that you guys were too hard on the deck, and I want to be able to defend it better. So that's my plan for this week. I have good intentions. Week before, though, I had a shout out that I never did because I forgot. But I played against this guy named Deshaun McLean. And we just played in the tournament practice room, and he mentioned the podcast. And we promised to shout out anybody who mentions the podcast on Magic Online to us. So there you go.
Nice. You know what's funny? Is I play on the Common Knowledge Magic Online account. Our name is literally Common Knowledge.
Yeah.
And I've never had anyone like, what is that? Or hey, you're that podcast. It's always I had one guy who went, that sounds like a podcast. Are you guys a podcast? And I said, yeah. Have you listened? No. Oh, well, go listen. It's just funny to me that I'm playing the Common Knowledge is my name on Magic Online when I'm playing Pauper, and I've never had anyone be like, "Oh my gosh, I listen."
That is weird.
I think it's funny, and you've always. I feel like you've always got stories. Like this is at least the second or third time you've shouted someone out. I feel like.
Yeah, I've had a few.
I think a lot of people just know you as Lobbert too, and so.
Oh my gosh, one more story. I did play. I think at that same week, I played against Deluxikov, like Propaganda. I don't know if I've talked about this, and he had no idea who I was. Like I was like, "Oh, I love your show, man. Like, watch all the time." And he's like, "Oh, that's awesome." And I was like waiting for him to like recognize me, and he never did. And I wasn't gonna like bring it up or anything. I want it to be natural when he actually knows who I am.
Shoot, that's funny. I just liked this week because this is the first time that you've been on the side of I didn't get to play any Magic, whereas I went like 2 weeks in a row without playing a single game of Magic. So the script is flipped, and I played Magic this week.
What
so
you played?
I'll give you one guess to try to guess.
Scred, like you said you would.
Okay, you're right.
Did you play a league?
I did.
Goal met.
1 week down, a lot more weeks to go.
An eternity to go.
Oh gosh. No, I did play a league last week with Scred, and I think this week, well, I have 2 more matches in a league that I started to finish with Scred, and so I'm going to finish that, and then I'm going to start a league with Tribe again, and I'm going to start jamming more games with Tribe, just because that deck's really fun to play, and I don't know, Scred's fun to play also, but I'm kind of getting burnt out on it a little bit.
You have played a lot of Scred, dude.
I do like Delvers a lot. Like a lot. But I'm just going to change it up a little bit. You know, I think if I try to rotate through decks more frequently, since my goal isn't really to like win as like, I mean, my goal is to win, obviously, when I play a game of Magic, I want to win, but my goal isn't to like, I need to get some tournament practice in to go play a challenge or whatever. I'm just playing leagues for my enjoyment and to learn more about the format and to get more experience within the format. And I think a good way to do that and to keep it fresh for me is I'm going to try to rotate through decks more frequently and try to get some more experience outside of what I'm comfortable in.
Yeah, I feel like I have to do that, is just switch it up pretty regularly.
Well, that's why I can't keep a modern deck. I finish a modern deck, I play one tournament with it, and I go, that was a fun deck. What's the next thing I can make? And then I sell that deck and build my new one.
Yeah, but it's not.
Fortunately, I don't have to sell my deck to build a new deck with poppers, so my paper popper collection is just huge. So I can play all the decks and still have them all, but...
Paper popper?
Paper popper. I was going to try to go to Oasis Games last week for their popper tournament.
Yeah.
They have a nightly popper tournament, and I called up some buddies, or I messaged up some buddies, and I was like, are you guys going to this? And I'm going to try and go. And they're like, yeah, we'll be there. And then I didn't go. And they were like, what the heck? And I was
what a scumbag.
Like, my wife got off late. I couldn't leave. I couldn't make it down to Salt Lake in time. But anyway, cool. So that's what we played, or didn't play in some people's case. Should we talk about our card of the week?
Yeah.
Cards of the week?
We have 10 of them.
10 cards of the week? Holy moly.
Yeah, we're doing this cards of the week on the bounce lands. And we did go into some depth on these in our mana base episode, but that was some number of episodes ago, so we're doing it again.
Yeah, we're doing it again. We thought that was fine to do. Instead of card of the week, we're doing like a sub theme of cards, I guess.
Yeah, they're similar enough. It's the same card. It
counts.
Yeah.
It's the same thing, guys. Chill out.
Yeah, calm down.
Cards of the week this week.
So
bouncy lands.
If you're living under a rock, a mana rock, bounce lands are those lands that when they enter the battlefield, you have to return a land to their owner's hand. So these are significant because it means you need fewer cards, like land cards in your hand, to get to a higher number of mana that you can produce. They do come with some awkwardness. We do have written here, do you need fewer lands in your mana base? I don't think that's the case because you have to have a bounce land and something else. So typically mana bases with these are like 21, 22 plus instead of
as opposed to like 23.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that oftentimes if you have like a full set, like 4 of these lands, you're safe to only play like one fewer land than you normally would.
Okay, like one fewer.
Yeah, yeah. You're not like, oh, I have 4 bounce lands in my hand. They count for 2, so that's 8 land slots. You're not playing 18 lands in your 23 land deck because you have 4 bounce lands.
They do come with some huge upsides. Being able to hit those higher mana costs without having to have the cards in your hand, like instead of having 3 lands in your hand, you can have 2 but still hit that same number. That's a huge upside.
Yeah, you can hit 4 mana and only have drawn 2 lands, and that's just 2 more spells that you drew instead to spend your mana on, right?
You need the
obviously you have the lands that got bounced, but you have 4 mana out of your 2 bounce lands.
Okay, yeah.
Instead of 4 lands plus the 2 lands that you bounce. So instead of having 6 lands, you have a total of 4.
I paused there and I was like, how pedantic do I want to be?
Yeah, you pedandrian. You're so pedantic.
I think one of the reasons these are especially great,
really quick,
because
spell that word.
Okay.
P-E-D. I don't know what it means. I've never heard that word before.
Pedantic.
What the? Here's the definition. Pedantic, adjective, of or like a pedant.
A pedant. A person who is excessively concerned with the minor details and rules or with displaying academic learning.
Well, if I actually clicked on it, I could have gotten that too. What a dumb word.
It's like you use that one. It's like if you're caught up in the little meaning of every little word, and it's like, oh, you said and you meant he.
I get what it means. I also could just kind of infer from context what it meant, but I wanted to derail the show.
Yeah, I'm derailed.
Cool. Well, thanks for listening, guys.
Okay, let me keep going from where I was at.
Okay.
I think these are one of the reasons that make these especially great is the fact that you can get extra. The actual returning the lands can be an upside when there's something like Bajuka Bog or the cycle lands, where you can like tap your cycle land for a mana, bounce it, and then it's always going to be the correct color of mana that you need to cycle it. So you're not so afraid to play those early turns because you know you can return them later and then get a card out of them.
Yeah, and with great synergy, though, comes great awkwardness. Much awkwardness.
Yeah, we were writing this, and there's a lot of points on awkwardness.
So, I mean, these are very powerful. They have a lot of high synergy with ETB effects on other lands. We've kind of talked about how there's sort of card advantage in the sense that you have double the mana for 2 fewer cards. So you've replaced those 2 lands you would have needed to draw on with spells instead. But they do come with a lot of awkwardness.
So it means that if you want to play a 2-drop on turn 2, any bounce land is going to make it so you can't do that. Like any tap land is what I mean. Of course you can't play a 2-drop on turn 2 when you're using your mana you're using that mana that turn to fix your mana base. And that's something I guess we haven't brought up yet is their mana fixing. Since they tap for either of the color or both of the colors, they're always gonna, once you hit one of these, you're gonna have your colors unless you need like 2 of a single color. But you know, what more do you want out of a land? It taps for 2.
I'd like it to tap for blue for my counterspell.
That would be pretty sweet.
But that's actually one of the other points that we have. We just kind of have some things that they're sort of awkward with. Like they make hard decisions for your mana base consideration, like your mana curve. You know, 2 drops are probably not that great if you have a ton of bounce lands in your deck. They make it awkward for double colored spells of the same color. So blue counter spell, you can't cast that off a bounce land. So now you need bounce land plus another blue source,
and then you're losing the mana.
You're losing a mana unless you can spend it.
And if you're doing something proactive, then again, you can't use that mana unless you've got, you can have something to do with it. But a lot of the time, if you need red for something, then you have this awkward white. I don't know why all of a sudden I'm just thinking of Boros. I think Boros is probably the biggest deck that plays these bounce lands.
And I think it's the deck that plays them the best.
I think the
Boros
reason
mana base the Boros is like curve, their mana curve, I think is really set up well to have bounce lands in their deck.
Yeah, the other one that does is Dimir, blue-black control. And I think the common theme across those decks is that they're mid-range or control decks. You're going to lose some tempo when you play this land, so you have to be able to catch back up, and so those kill spells are necessary.
Right, and then these lands are also just helping make sure that they hit their land drops consistently to get to their big finishing spells as well.
What makes them even more awkward, say you have blue, like 2 islands up, and you need to make a land drop. You want to keep up counterspell, but now you have to play your bounce land, so you have to actually go negative mana. Like, not only have you played a tap land, you've had to return your untapped blue land so that you can put this on the field, so it shut off your counterspell on your 3rd turn. So it makes for these really hard decisions of deciding when you're going to play which land, like deciding whether to play a normal tap land, an untapped land, or a bounce land. It can be a really awkward decision depending on what you want to have up and how proactive you want to be. You kind of have to start planning out your turns that way. But people do it because the power is there. And of course, when you're playing this on the draw, that playing a bounce land on turn 2, if you haven't played anything else, means that you're going to discard a card if you haven't taken any mulligans.
So some other fun synergies that this card has, and this one's not very common in this format, and that's actually with untap effects. There's only one, right? Snap? No.
There's one good one, and that's
Snap. There's one good one, I guess we should say. I was trying to remember if Frantic Search was banned.
Frantic Search is banned, but there was a card that the professor was excited about, the negate with...
Oh, the
negate
unwind,
snap.
Negate.
Yeah.
The bad version of rewind.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, when you have untap effects like that with your bounce lands, you can actually net yourself mana. And bounce lands, interestingly enough, are sort of the part of the linchpin that holds together that Familiars combo deck. So, like, the presence of bounce lands in this format has actually just created like an entire archetype.
And they've been doing that for a while. I want to say they helped get Peregrine Drake and Cloud of Fairies banned.
Good riddance.
They are also awkward with, like, if you're playing against Chittering Rats. Like, one of the rules if you're playing against Chittering Rats is, you know how usually the best idea is to hold the last land in your hand? Just to kind of confuse your opponent and maybe make them think that you have something.
Mm.
You're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to play it so that they can't time walk you, basically.
Yeah, so you can get a fresh draw, and if you're bouncing your lands back to your hand, you might not be able to deploy everything quickly enough.
Yeah, like not even deploying everything. Like if that's your top deck is a bounce land.
Yeah, I guess just like emptying your hand enough.
Yeah,
it's
just impossible to play that last land because you can only make 1 land drop a turn. So
oh my gosh, you're locked like for like an extra turn.
Yeah.
Ugh.
But
yeah, that's so gross.
Chittering Rats isn't really played, so we don't have to worry about that as much. But maybe for someone who isn't as familiar with the format and they stumble across a Chittering Rats deck again, someone's playing like mono black, that That's some good knowledge to have.
A little bit of common knowledge for you guys.
And the last point I'm going to make, and this is highly irrelevant, is they can bounce themselves to trigger landfall. Like you
can just have
play
infinite lands. One per turn. Infinite lands.
Infinite
one
land per turn.
For infinite turns until you die.
I've done that.
Playing landfall.
Yeah, I've done that, and that deck is spicy in a bad way.
Yeah. Like gives you the spicy stomach bubbles.
The squirts. Are we ready to move on?
Yeah. Juvenile. So this week, our topic, we are going to do another deep dive episode. I feel like we haven't done a deep dive episode in a little while, and so we're going to do one, and we're going to do it about the elves. The elveses.
Elvis.
The elvies. Elves. The deck of elves. You know that deck. It's just a bunch of little green men.
Yeah, this deck gives me brewing anxiety because either I'm playing some kind of removal deck that it's super easy, or I just can't beat it. And I think a lot of the meta decks aren't so polarized, but when you're brewing, keeping up with this deck is tough.
Yeah, you kind of got to think from a brewer's perspective. Like you said, you either need to have enough removal that you can just keep them in check, or what you're brewing, what your deck is trying to do, needs to be just more busted. You need to have that percentage chance of like, okay, I combo killed them before they elf balled me.
Yeah, and when that's happening turn 3 or 4, like they don't kill you turn 3, but they've set themselves up turn 3 to like, they played a Well-Wisher. I hope a Curian Ranger doesn't come down. Oh, that's a Curian Ranger. And that happens all the time, and they can just get away from you like that.
Yeah. And so Elves as a deck, it sort of falls into the spectrum. And we've talked about this spectrum before, the Patrick Chapin spectrum of archetypes. It kind of falls into the Agor combo deck, as I spelled it in the show notes.
Agor.
It's good old Agor. But yeah, it's an aggro deck. It wants to make creatures and attack with them. But it's kind of got this combo finish of, you touched on it with Well-Wisher, Curian Ranger, but there's also Timberwatch Elf plus Curian Ranger to just sort of, you can either gain insurmountable amounts of life, or you can attack your opponent and they're going to block a couple of your guys, and then the 2 elves that didn't get blocked, you pump one of them huge, and then you untap him and you pump your other one huge, and your opponent took 18 damage.
Yeah, and that's in addition to, a lot of the time they have an Elvish Vanguard that just ended up being just a huge guy. Like, he ends up being a 10/10, and you're forced to block him every turn. So they have this kind of an edict effect where they're attacking with a guy so large that you're forced to block him.
Yeah, they just have a one-sided abyss in play.
Yeah.
Like, you can't answer it unless you're playing white and can exile it away. It's just bigger than any other removal spell. I guess, like, you could play black. I always forget that, like, black has targeted removal. And just in my mind, everything is 3 damage, -3, -3, -2, -2.
Yeah, and
I always forget that, like, there are Doom Blades out there, but
you can bolt it before it gets too large and things like that.
Right,
but that's really
gotta,
demanding
like, really
that
be able to
you have the bolt in time. Yeah.
It's like if I'm from the reason this deck scares me from the perspective of Skred Delver game 1 is it takes me. I typically can have red mana by turn 3, and a lot of times by turn 3, they've been able to like make an Elvish Vanguard and turn it into something bigger. By the time I can get my red mana, and sometimes by the time I get my red mana, it's an Evolving Wilds, and so I've got to wait till turn 4. I untap on turn 4. And so, yeah, you've just got to really be able to make your timing. And if you can't keep up with what they're doing, if you stumble like even a tiny little bit, they just run you right over.
Yeah, because there's so many must-answer threats in this deck. Like a resolved, like if you go down the list, it's like a resolved Well-Wisher just means that you're never going to be able to catch back up. Elvish Vanguard means that they're just going to abyss you every turn. We already talked about Timberwatch Elf just being able to tap and create an Elvish Vanguard out of a 1/1. Basically, it's a huge guy. And
Yeah,
then
not to mention like all the onboard tricks. Let's say we're on like turn 3 and their 3 mana is tapped. Are they tapped out? Well, no, because they could have a Birchlore Ranger, they could have Curian Ranger. There are just so many tricks they can do, and so it's really difficult to try to think through your mind about all the ways that they could interact with you when you do try to go for the lightning bolt on their creature. Like, what can they do to protect it? And the answer is quite a bit.
Yeah, you know, and then I think the last one I didn't mention, I just wanted to get all of them named off, is Lissalana Huntmaster. They're just going to overwhelm you with little duder guys.
Yeah, and that's sort of the plan A of this deck, is to make basically just like vomit their hand onto the board as quickly as they can, and then play one of those sort of key pieces: the Timberwatch Elf, Curian Ranger, and Well-Wisher, trying to get some combination of those cards into play. And that's sort of the plan A of this deck. And then the plan B of this deck is it just plays a really strong aggro game where it just sort of overwhelms the board really quickly. And I've played games where, I've made like a Delver on turn 1, an Augur Bolus on turn 2, and then on turn 3 I was able to cast like a Fairy Miscreant, Spellstutter Sprite, one of their plays, but I was on the draw that game and they were still able to like play 5 Elves, fill their hand with one of their big spells, and they just started attacking me. And I was like, well, I'll eat 2 of your guys and trade with 2 of your guys and I'll take 6. Okay. And then the next turn it was like, play more Elves, attack you again. So even though I was making favorable blocks, they just had so much cards. They just had such a big stream of Elves that I couldn't stop it, even though I was making favorable trades. I was, getting up cards technically, but not technically up cards, because they Distant Melody and
they're way past you again.
Yeah. What's the other one? God.
Lead the Stampede.
I always forget the name of the 3-mana one, the good one.
Lead the Stampede.
Lead the Stampede. I always want to call it like Follow the Pack or something. Why? I think that there are 2 cards that have similar artworks: Lead the Stampede and like a Summon the Pack. I don't know. It's one of the newer cards and it's got like Nissa on it and she's like in a tree or something. And like they're very similar artworks, and so in my mind I always mix them up.
And in addition to all of those things that are must answer threats that are all guys, if you're playing a counter spell deck, you have to worry about that Lead the Stampede and that Distant Melody. So you can't just save your counter spells for the good threats. You have to weigh whether are they going to just get 2 good threats off of their Lead the Stampede or Distant Melody, because they probably are. And if they only get 1, yeah, you can counter that. But then they just made 3 1/1s that, maybe they're gaining a bunch of life or something.
Yeah, the deck just has so many value, like must answer cards. Like you said at the beginning when we first started this, is like there are just so many must answer threats in this deck. That's like, well, I don't have a lightning bolt, but they just cast a Timberwatch Elf. I have to counter this because I can't not let it. I can't just sit here and take 8 every turn from a creature until I hopefully draw interaction. And then you counter it, and then the next turn you have no counter magic, and they can Distant Melody, they can Lead the Stampede, and all of a sudden you're just so far behind in cards that most of the time, game 1, it's really hard to keep up.
And much of the time, your strategy to beat this deck is, I think they're only going to have 1 or 2 land drops. If I can kill the first Mana Dork, or maybe like the Priest of Titania, then they'll never get off the ground. So you've now used some number, like, I don't know how many kill spells you have in your deck, somewhere between 8 and 15 if you're a normal deck. Skrid Delver has 6, like, or 7, sorry, 7. And you've just used, 2 of them to kill their first 2 mana dorks. They ended up hitting their 3rd land drop because, they just did. Or they hit a Curian Ranger, and that is counting as another land drop every turn, an additional mana that you can't possibly answer all their threats. So now you're stuck in a race where if they draw a Well-Wisher, they automatically win.
Yeah, and I'm going to circle back to, you touched on it, this card sort of again at the beginning, but we're going to kind of talk about it again here, and that's Lissalana Huntmaster. And on its surface, this card seems weird in Elves. It costs 4 mana. It kind of would glut up your hand. It doesn't seem like it's on play with the play all your efficient elf creatures as quickly as possible kind of a thing. But this card gives the deck a really interesting ability that I really like in decks like this to switch its role. Your opponent has managed to eat a few of your creatures in combat or whatever. He's been able to remove stuff, and they feel like they're stable. And you're able to resolve a Lissalana Huntmaster and untap with it. You're probably running away with that game again.
So you already have your Timberwatch plan, and a lot of people will go for removing your tap effect creatures, get rid of your Well-Wisher and your Timberwatch so they're not repeatable. But then with the Lissalana Huntmaster, your Nettle Sentinels, and a Vanguard, that is
forget about those morphed bleh. I was about to say merched Burflore Rangers. Those morphed Birchlore Rangers.
Yeah, they
have a lot of bears.
They have a lot of guys that are decent at attacking, and that's a really good backup, like win con.
Yeah,
it's not just a combo deck.
Put all their resources into trying to kill your doofy little elves, because let's face it, like Curian Ranger's not doing any battle.
Probably not until you're attacking with
not
12
until, like,
1/1s. Yeah,
winning the game. So they spend all their resources. Okay, I have to counter this Timberwatch elf. I've got to kill this Titania, Priest of Titania, and then you're just like, all right, here's an Elvish Vanguard. Here's the Lissalana Huntmaster. Now I have bigger threats than you. And more cards, because Distant Melodies.
Well, yeah, if you're spending all of your time casting Counterspell and, Lightning Bolt, like any kind of just, I'm removing your guys, then you don't have any blockers. You also have to have this plan for them attacking with, 6 1/1s a turn for 6 damage, plus a Nettle Sentinel or something. They're just coming at you from all of these different angles.
Yeah.
And I just love the Agor.
Such good Agor. I love me a good Agor deck, especially when it has a combo finish. Or is Elves a combo deck with an Agor finish?
I think it's a combo deck with an Agor backup plan.
Okay, cool. So I said it was Agor combo. Let's say it's combo Agor. I'm all tongue-tied now.
Okay.
All right, let's move on. I didn't put it in the show notes because I didn't think about it when I was writing them, and I just thought about it now during our conversation. But we've talked about all the strong points of this deck. Let's kind of try to talk about a few of the weak points, just so if you're looking to pick up the deck, you can kind of understand that, or if you just kind of want to be able to play against it, you can understand where kind of the flaws are in this strategy. And I think the biggest one is Flood. Doesn't happen often. You only have 13 lands in your deck, but if you draw like 4 of those lands, 4 of those 13, which isn't super out of the spectrum of possible, you're going to have a really hard time. The other thing is it sort of can just fizzle on itself. If you don't draw the right mix of combo pieces, if you draw only big threats, you're kind of playing this really bad mid-range game against a format that's really good against beating up on bad mid-range decks. Like if I'm going to cast an Elvish Vanguard on turn 2 and then on turn 3 a Timberwatch Elf and turn 4 Lissalon a Huntmaster, you're probably not going to win that game, even though those are all powerful cards on their own. And then the inverse to that is I just drew a bunch of mana creatures and Corian Rangers, and I could make infinite mana, but I never drew a Well-Wisher. I never drew a Wind Piece, and they were able to just sort of build up a defense with their creatures and lightning bolt my key 1/1s, and I never got off the ground.
And I think one thing that people do to mitigate flood, which it's funny to say that a 12-13 land somewhere in there, 12-13 land deck is trying to even further mitigate that, is people will play land grant to, like, they go 1-for-1 to replace those forests so that they thin that extra little bit. It does some cool things for free. It can untap your Nettle Sentinel. That's usually never a problem, but there's extra synergy there, and I think there's a lot of versions of this deck that people try different things with.
Yeah, there's a little bit of flexibility to be able to do stuff like that. We actually saw some of that flexibility in Methonical, his deck from the challenge. He top 8'd 2 weeks in a row, I think, with the same deck list, and he had a main deck Spider Silk Armor. And so we're kind of going to talk about that a little bit in our next segment, but that's sort of just, there's a tiny bit of flex in these deck lists for you to do things like that, where you feel like, okay, I want to mitigate my flood, so I'm going to play a land grant, or like I really want to be able to block all the flyers in this format, so I'm going to play a Spider Silk Armor or whatever.
Like a Thipperian Longbow, just like I have one removal spell, but
yeah,
it kills everything.
Everything. So let's move on and talk about sideboarding with this deck. And so this is something that I've never really thought about because I've never sideboarded with Elves, but I've played against Elves a lot, and I've thought a lot about sideboarding against Elves. And that's sort of where this is sort of how I wrote this part of the show, was that I thought about, how do I sideboard against Elves? And what you should be thinking about when you're sideboarding with a deck like Elves is, what is my opponent doing? And that is how you should sideboard for, right? So, like what hate cards is my opponent bringing in? What is their game plan going to be against me to combat me? And then how am I going to mitigate the effects of their hate as much as possible?
Okay, yeah, it's those hate cards, like not what did they do game 1, but what will they be doing
you should
game
be
2.
thinking about, that's what I meant, what your opponent did in sideboarding, not what they did in game 1. Think about what they're doing in their sideboard plan. How are they going to try to fight you? What cards do they have available to them that ruin your game plan? And then sideboard in a way that mitigates the damage, mitigates the effects of their sideboarding.
And most of the time, it's going to be like Shrivel and Electrickery, something that does 1 damage to all your Elves. And you end up bringing in Spider Silk Armor, and I've brought in enough Spider Silk Armors to know that sometimes that just ends up being dead. Like, you're bringing in a non-creature spell in a deck with Lead the Stampede. Like, it doesn't forward your game plan, it just makes sure you don't lose. And that can feel bad, but it's still the right decision.
Yeah, that's another thing that I sort of figured out while I was thinking about this deck and thinking about how I would sideboard, is when I looked at all these cards in the sideboards and thought, like, okay, that would be great here, that would be great here. And then I looked at the main deck and I was like, well, am I cutting Distant Melodies now? Am I cutting Lead the Stampedes? Am I cutting Nettle Sentinels because that guy doesn't do anything compared to my other Elves that have actual lines of text on them? Like, what do I do? And that was one of the things that I have been struggling with thinking about this deck, is what do you take out?
So one of the go-tos, like one of the first questions you should ask is, do I need my life gain package? Because every Elves deck runs a life gain package. And
Yeah.
you may not need it. Like if they're not going that fast, you just try to go faster. It is tough though, because other than that, it's maybe some of your Llanowar Elf type effects, or Priest of Titania, because it's a little bit slower. Like I think you're trying to gauge how fast you need to go and know which cards can be cut to go faster.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. If you know you're going to be playing against Electrickeries and Sandstorms and Shrivels and all sorts of things like that, maybe you do want to cut some of your one mana creatures for more high impact spells that, if drawn after a sweeper, help claw you back into the game better than, like I feel like the probability of you playing a game where your board got wiped and you've now got to try to claw back in is a lot greater in these post board games than, oh, I just killed him on turn 3, turn 4, and he didn't have the sweeper. So I think that makes sense. I would probably board out some of those weaker, low impact elves.
I do think that you were right. The Distant Melody is one of the cards that you might sideboard out if you don't think you can get to a high number of elves. If you're playing playing against a removal heavy deck, the Lead the Stampede doesn't have a condition. It doesn't care.
Lead the Stampede, I think, is always just good.
Yeah.
I don't think you should actually ever board that out.
Yeah, not that I know of.
Yeah, but we're not pros, so at Elves, we're not pros in general, but we're definitely not pros at Elves.
And so we were talking about earlier how they'll have these spicy cards. They'll have the Spider Silk in the main, a Viridian Longbow in the main, some kind of sideboard tech in the main, and
that's
those
always
are
a free sideboard slot.
Yeah, that's a good spot to look at. Like, they're not playing Electrickery. I don't need to take out. Well, I don't need to have this Spider Silk armor. Yeah. Like, they don't have flyers. I'm playing against, I don't know, slivers. Like, this is gonna just be a dead card. I don't care about the toughness. And those do make your decisions really easy.
I know, I get your point. But like, if you're playing against slivers, do you even need a sideboard? just barf on them with your little green men.
Yeah, you do.
Do you?
Yes.
Okay.
You're gonna.
Sure, you're gonna.
But I knew I shouldn't have said slivers, but it was like the first thing.
You're making a good point. I just had to rag on slivers because they're my favorite creatures. But I'll never play a sliver deck in Pauper.
Don't say never.
Never say never. I'll never play a sliver deck in Pauper. I think we've talked about what it would take to make that deck really like playable.
And it would be Brandon eating his fist.
Something like that. Oh yeah, I did say that. I said I would eat my fist. Was that for slivers?
Yeah, if slivers becomes like a tier 1 deck without them printing a new card, you would eat your fist on camera. I'm still just kind of hoping.
Yeah, I remember saying that now. Anyway, I've derailed this again. Some other types of hate that I learned about watching videos of Elves this week is Standard Bearer actually sort of hoses this deck.
Oh yeah, a lot.
Like, I never thought about that. I was watching the game and it just turned to their opponent slammed Standard Bearer and I went, what? And the elf player went, well, I have 2 Carrion Rangers in my hand, so that sucks. And I was like, oh, wow.
It's okay. That's kind of the side effect. The card you're turning off is Timberwatch Elf.
Yeah, it turns off Timberwatch Elf's interaction, and it turns off Carrion Ranger's ability to untap things.
Yeah.
I mean, you can still bounce the land to your hand, which is useful if you need the extra mana, but you're not able to untap your Well-Wisher, so you're not going to be able to run away with that. And if they can control your board to where, I'm dealing you 5 damage a turn and you're gaining 4 life a turn, you can mitigate that. And so that was one that I just never thought about.
Yeah, and a lot of the time those Standard Bearer decks do have a bit of removal, so they can throw down that Standard Bearer and not have to remove a bunch of the cards and focus it on certain other things. I never realized how good that was until I actually did it, and it just makes, like, it's just a breath of like, Oh, I have some wiggle room now. I can play my game.
Yeah. Well, you've cut off two of their must answer threats with one card. That's 8 cards in their deck that are no longer things you're afraid of.
I think the last one you have listed here is Fog Effects. This is basically Tron, and
Yeah.
Elves pack one specific card for this. I guess Verdian Longbow functions as a solution, but that takes so long. Even when you're producing 12 mana a turn and you can ping 4 times, that takes a long time. So they end up running
Mob Rule?
Massive Raid.
Massive Raid. Yeah, what's Mob Rule?
I'm not sure.
I know it's a magic card though, but yeah, Massive Raid.
And
this is a card. This is a card I asked about last week because I was like, before the show, we were looking at. I don't think I brought it up on the show, but we were looking at deck lists, and I was like, "What the heck is Massive Raid? Is this good?" And Sean kind of teached me, put me back in my spot. And
okay, so if you're not familiar with Massive Raid, it is 1 and 2 red, so colorless red for an instant. It deals damage to target creature or player. I didn't know that it even said creature. It's so that you can kill them in one go, and you're not using combat damage. So you're playing this off-color card just to subvert fog effects. I have seen Flaring Pain, and I don't believe in that card as much as Massive Raid because it doesn't just win on the spot, and you do have to do it in your combat step. There's also a version of Massive Raid that is a colorless and a single red that is sorcery that does the same thing, but they end up playing Massive Raid, and the Maverick Girl, I've watched a few of her videos, and she just says that the instant speed is worth it. You can kind of trick them into thinking that they only have to leave up 2 mana, and you can get around them. A lot of the time, yeah, you're playing against Tron, and that's what this is for. You can make so many mana that, unless they're actually using some kind of actual counterspell, like they can't syncopate you, whatever it is, condescend, and then have enough mana to still fog you. So apparently, I'll trust the expert. Massive Raid is the card to go with.
Yeah, I've definitely come around to it after I looked at it and thought well, this seems derpy. But thinking about it in the context of the matchups where it's good, like Tron, for instance, it's just really, really good.
And isn't it kind of funny? The only way that you're making this red, which I know a lot of people are wondering about, is Birchlore Rangers.
Mm-hmm.
Birchlore Rangers has so many modes that people don't know about. It can make other color mana than green. That's probably news to people. And it morphs.
Always confused me. I always forgot that.
Which one? The mana?
The mana. I always could remember that it was a morph, but I could never. Whenever my opponent would I'd look at an elf deck, and I remember when I first started playing Pauper, I would look at elf deck lists, and then I would Sean, what the heck is going on with this deck? He's playing Distant Melody, and you'd be like, Birchlore Ranger, remember? And I was like, oh yeah, dang it, I forgot about that guy.
Yeah, and they are running a single island and Sylvan Ranger to go tutor for that island.
Yeah.
So they have 3 cards in their deck that can go find them a blue source that isn't Birchlore Rangers. So that's 7 total, but when you're drawing that many cards.
Yeah, they have 7 total blue sources, which is quite a bit. And then when you think about all you need to do is draw 1 Birchlore Ranger, and now every 2 elves you have is a mana source of any color.
I don't think we brought up the combo that Birchlore Ranger has with Nettle Sentinels.
Oh yeah, we haven't talked about that. Yeah, that's probably one of the silliest things that this deck is capable of doing. Yeah. It's one of the reasons that this deck is able to go off, so to say.
So the combo is that with a single Birchlore Ranger and 1 Nettle Sentinel, you can play any number of 1-drops. Because every time you play a 1-drop, that Nettle Sentinel's going to untap, and then you've just played another untapped creature. So you can play any number of those. If you have 2 Nettle Sentinels, you're netting half a mana every time you play
Yeah.
a 1-drop.
Yep. And so then eventually, yeah, you're kind of getting ahead on your mana there. That's a pretty broken synergy.
Yeah, and then if you have a Lissalana Huntmaster, you are off to the races, my friend.
You win the game.
Pretty much. But I just love that Elves gets to play the green sideboard cards. Green is one of the most, I think, versatile, because they can hit both those artifacts and enchantments with the same spell. They pretty much always play Gleeful Sabotage since they have so many green dudes. And that spell is just the nuts.
Yeah,
And
being able to conspire with that card is stupid. Because, like you said, you have so many guys. It's not hard to you can kill multiple things. You can play through counter spells where it's like, okay, I really need to answer this thing, but I don't want to get counterspelled, so I'm just going to conspire and target the thing I want twice. Yeah,
because even if you counterspell it, that copy is still
going to resolve.
Yeah. They can play Scattershot Archer, Kyrian Rangers, untapping creatures. Just, it keeps, like, there's so many things that it allows this deck to do. Like, the Timberwatch Elf activating multiple times a turn, and then activating on your opponent's turn as well, because you can untap it again. Like, that's nutty. Being able to untap your Scattershot Archer, and then just mow down all of the flyers on the board that have 1 toughness or more, also nutty. And I love that Scattershot Archer has a 2 toughness body. Like, where is the justice in this world? Like, they're boarding in Electrickery, and now you've just boarded in a 2 toughness creature that has tap, board wipe for a lot of decks.
Yeah. I hate Scattershot Archer so much. So much hate on this card.
And then I don't know if I have much else to say about the sideboard, so real quick I want to talk about something that the reason I don't ever want to play Elves. I like the deck. I've put it together and I stopped playing for this very reason. The mirror.
Oh,
have you seen the mirror?
I wasn't even going to talk about it.
Oh my gosh. Let's talk about it though. Most
so
elves.
It hurts to think about elf mirrors.
Most elves that you're playing are old elves that count your opponents as well. It's one of the reasons, other than that, Well-Wisher and Essence Warden exist, that elves just stomps on Stompy. They play a lot of elves. They're playing their own Kyrian Rangers. They're playing Nettle Sentinel. Any deck that plays elves, you've just powered up your opponent's elves. Like, Priest of Titania is tapping for more.
Yeah.
It's so nuts. And I was at GP Vegas. I looked to my right, and there's these 2 elves players playing against each other. One of them was at 700 life, the other one was at 1,000. They were using notepads to keep track of their elf tokens because they were in the hundreds. There was no way to break the mirror.
One player was at 700 because he had just been attacked for like 300. And he was going to go back up to 1,000 shortly, but why?
And, it's like, okay, activate Well-Wisher. And then they're both like sitting there counting. And it's like, okay, Kyrian Ranger trick. Activate Well-Wisher a second time. Just to put themselves so far ahead that the other person can't. And it's like, okay, are you just waiting to deck each other? That doesn't sound like fun.
Like, who was on the draw this game?
And then both of their vanguards are like 80-80s, but one guy's has an 81-81. So now that guy's just getting chump blocked, and it looked miserable. And they were both grinning from ear to ear, like, look at all my elves! And I was just like, no.
Yeah, you've got to really be passionate about your elf deck to want to put yourself through the mirror.
What just happened?
It just happened.
You need to rejoin.
I've lost the audio again.
It went about 4 octaves deeper, and it's no longer synced with your mouth. Like, it was so much deeper, I thought someone else joined our room. I thought Satan was talking to me.
Hello, Sean.
Oh my gosh, this is weird.
Ooga booga booga.
Hey, okay, I'm back and no longer possessed by Satan, apparently.
That was so weird. I'm leaving that in there, yeah.
Cool. All right. I think we're running a little long, but Sean, you have one more point that we kind of want to cover, and then we'll do that and before we kind of wrap up. So
yeah, before we wrap in vigor.
That was a good one.
It's sequencing. I think we did spend a lot of the time talking about playing across the table from Elves, because I think that's where most people are. But sequencing is really interesting in Elves, and I think one of the great things about this deck for people that play it, of you want to jam hundreds of matches, because just knowing which cards to play in which order against which opponent is something that you can really just master. You have to prioritize, do you want to play something that you want to die first? Do you want to play the thing that allows you to do the most nuts thing? Like, when do you want to play your Vanguard? Do you want to play it turn 2 and then play a bunch of Elves so that you have this giant beater that's pressuring them? Or do you want to just go Mana Dork, Mana Dork, Mana Dork, Mana Dork, and then start jamming Huntmasters or something, which would in turn make your Vanguard bigger? And I think we skipped over it a little bit earlier because we don't know, because we're not Elves experts.
Yeah, I think just based on what I've watched of other players, I think the biggest thing is about just optimizing mana efficiency on turns 1 through 3, and thinking about what gives me the most mana on my following turn for the early sequencing. Like, I think that you want to play out your mana creatures as quickly as possible, and then you want to play your like Nettle Sentinels and Curian Rangers and stuff like that. And then you want to play your Birchler Rangers because he's not affected by Summoning Sickness. And if you've got the choice between like playing 3 Elves on turn 2 or playing a Priest of Titania and another random elf, like, I think you want to play the Priest of Titania, and then you can untap with just so much more mana available to you. And so it's all about, I think, figuring out what is the most optimal way to spend your mana, give you the most mana for your buck.
Yeah, I think you're right, and that's kind of why I wanted to call this a combo first and then an aggro deck, is because that's how you sequence your spells. Of,
you mean an Agor deck?
Yeah, combo Agor, and like, that's how you play. Like, that's how the deck is played, is getting the most amount of mana as quickly as possible, so that, yeah, you can hit one of your Lead the Stampede spells or something like that, and then just be able to play all 5 of those cards, because inevitably they hit 5. But I think that's it.
Yeah. That was our deep dive on Elves. Thank you guys so much for listening to the show this week. Don't forget to check out our sponsor, puremtgo.com. You can find great articles, deck lists, and all sorts of fun stuff there. You can email the show if you got a question, comment, whatever. commonknowledgemtg@gmail.com. And if you like what you hear and would like to show your support for us, you can do so at patreon.com/commonknowledge. There you'll be able to check out the rules for our 5-color blind tournament, which is part of our stretch goal for $50 a month from Patreon donations. And you also get some fun perks there, like being able to see the Lobbert versus Brandon videos that we have available.
One cool thing I wanted to bring up with our 5-card blind tournament is we have decided that we want to make this available to everyone. We want to make sure that it's known that, yeah, when the Patreon hits $50 a month, that we're going to have, as long you have to submit an MTGO account and your deck list, and you're entered. and we'll run them all against each other, and then we'll try to get a hold of you from the email that you sent it from. And we just want to get a bunch of people looking at the podcast. We want to give out some prizes. And if you want to be that guy that's just like, that sounds like it would be awesome, you can donate all of that money yourself just for like a month to see what that 5-card blind tournament would actually look like. It's going to look sweet. If you want to donate prizes, hit us up via email. That would be awesome.
Yeah. I've got a few prizes that I'm donating myself, just in the form of things in my own collection, playmats and the like, but we're definitely open to prize donations for that as well. And yeah, so I guess I sort of misspoke there because I said be a part of the 5-card blind tournament, be a patron. But as soon as we hit that $50 stretch goal, we are holding the 5-card blind tournament, and anyone is eligible, patron or no.
So make it happen, guys.
Boom. So email address, MTGO account name, so that we can have something to call you by.
Yeah, start thinking of decks. Don't email us yet with your cards, because
wait till we
actually get it going.
We want to have the emails a little organized. We don't want to get overwhelmed with emails and lose track of stuff. So wait until we say send us in your emails, and then we'll give you like a 2-week grace period or something like that after we've made the stretch goal, where you can submit those emails, and then we'll be able to have everything in a good time frame to help keep us organized. So, Sean, where can the listeners find you if they want to find you?
You can find
Where's your house? Tell us your address.
My address is 2433. Just kidding. You can find me on Twitter at Lobbert8. That's Lobbert, and then the number 8. And you can also search on Twitter for me if you look for Lobbert. Where can they find you, Brandon?
Also on the tweeters, you can find me at bclark_CK, as in common knowledge.
Oh.
Wow. And you can also follow the show. You'll be able to get updates of our stretch goals, our 5-card blind tournaments, whatever we're doing, as well as being able to see when the new shows are up. You can do that by following us Twitter at CKPodcastMTG. Okay, well, thank you guys all so much for listening. That was the show.
See ya! Common Knowledge is part of the Constructed Criticism Network.